Well, it's noon, so we can go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. It's really exciting to be here as part of the festival. It's the Moab Festival of Science, and I'm so excited that we will be speaking here with Lyle Balenquah for this live Q&A session after his interview that just aired on KZMU. And so, like I said, this is part of the Moab Festival of Science, and this particular event is funded by a grant from Society for Science, which we're super grateful for. And so for those who maybe missed the interview and missed the introduction to Lyle, Lyle is a Hopi archaeologist and a guide who works across the Four Corners region. Lyle, thank you so much for being here. Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit more and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Greetings to everybody out there. Thanks for joining us. My name's Lyle Balenquah from the village of Balenquah on 3rd Mesa, which is on the Hopi Reservation. I'm a member of the Greasewood clan, and I currently work mostly as an archaeologist and sometimes a river and hiking guide here in the Southwest.
Awesome. So, you know, in our interview with Lyle, we talked about his journey, or your journey, Lyle, into archaeology, and the importance of managing and preserving these ancestral lands. And so I want to encourage everybody in attendance and anybody watching on Facebook Live to put in your questions. This event is meant as a way for you to be able to ask Lyle the questions that you want to know about his work as an Indigenous archaeologist. So please start putting your questions in the Q&A or the chat here on the webinar, and also on Facebook. We're monitoring it there as well. But so, Lyle, I just want to get us started by, you know, acknowledging you're down in Hopi, we're up here in Moab, and I'm aware that Moab is considered ancestral lands to many Indigenous communities in the region. And I just was wondering if we could start with you kind of describing what ancestral lands, what that means to you.
So, you know, I think most people are aware of the reservation system that all the tribes, most federally recognized tribes, have in place in terms of where we're located now. In many cases, those are federally designated boundaries, land bases, sometimes based in, you know, where we were when the federal government or Westerners came across us, or where they relocated certain tribal nations to other regions. So ancestral lands really is a concept and idea that illustrates the cultural connections and uses that extend well beyond those, you know, what are basically political boundaries of a reservation system. So the Hopi tribe is 1.6 million acres here in northeastern Arizona. However, that's a very small portion of what our ancestors use and what we historically use, and also what we continue to use in the present day. So ancestral lands really is talking about those lands that we have had access to and utilized, we have occupied well before the coming of Europeans, of Western concepts of what land ownership talks about. And so again, yeah, those connections are always well outside, well beyond, you know, what the current reservation system shows us on a map. And so for Hopi, you know, even though Moab is kind of way up there, we still have traditions, clan histories of certain clans from Hopi making their way all the way up into that region. You know, my clan, the Greasewood clan, has traditions of occupying areas around Arches, you know, National Park. And so it can be wide and varied, and it differs from tribe to tribe. But again, it's important to remember that what you see on the current map of tribal reservations is only a small fraction of what, you know, we have connections to.
Thanks for that explanation. And someone had already actually asked in advance, you know, asking specifically about Hopi and wondering Hopi's connection to the specific areas here. So you even talked about Arches and how Hopi has a connection there. So that's getting at questions people have been interested in. We have one question from Travis. He's wondering, you talk about these landscapes, these ancestral lands, and how expansive they are, and the connections that Indigenous peoples can have to them. But these lands are being used by a lot of different people and increasingly visitors and recreation. And so Travis was wondering, kind of thinking about how increased OHV traffic, you'd mentioned that specifically in the interview. So OHV traffic at a place like River House, and how those, how that visitation, has had impacts on the ancestral lands and the ancestral sites that you have been involved with.
Yeah, that whole area, River House, is a really good example. And there's many, throughout southeastern Utah and across landscapes in general. But by their design, OH vehicles are designed for very off highway, off dirt road use. They're capable of accessing areas that you can't get to, in a larger vehicle. And so that gives folks the opportunities, to get into areas that they normally wouldn't utilize via, a motorized vehicle. And so there's several good examples, like at River House, large caravans of OHVers coming in. It's not just the road use. Of course, we have a lot of impacts from people widening roads, ruts being created, but a lot of folks don't realize the amount of vibration and noise that is generated by these vehicles in huge caravans. I was talking to another archaeologist friend of mine, or I think he's a geologist actually, but he's looking at seismic vibrations and how they're affecting natural land formations. And I raised the question to him that it'd be interesting to get a handle on, how much vibration is occurring at some of these sites when, they're in close proximity to the dirt road, the off-road that's coming in. And so there were many times you could literally feel the ground and feel the structure shake itself when these huge, not just huge, but caravans or vehicles were coming into the site. So things like that we may not be aware of, because you're in the vehicle, maybe you're away from the site, you're not taking that into consideration of the reciprocal impacts, that are happening beyond just driving. We also had to install kind of like these big wooden barricades along an entrance road because there was a choke point in the road. And of course, when two vehicles coming on, one has to go off to the side. And folks were going up on the berm, not realizing that they were driving right over two large ancestral sites, a Great Kiva and also a room block. And because they're eroded to grade, they're hard to see, or if you don't know what you're looking for, you may not even notice what you're driving over. And so we had to spend a day erecting these large wooden barricades to prevent that kind of impact. And so it's wide and varied. I was just at River House yesterday with a group, and we drove out the dirt road, and I've noticed just way more many dirt road tracks, people driving up and over the sand dunes, leaving the main dirt road and kind of bypassing areas that had gotten muddy or other areas, and not just within the road corridor, but well off the road itself. So better signage, I think, is necessary, better education. There needs to be a lot more presence in terms of what kind of impacts, these vehicles are having. I think they can be used responsibly, but again, that's kind of, up to the operator who's driving the vehicle itself. So a wide range of impacts, vibrations, impacts to the ground, not just the cultural sites, but there's cryptobiotic soil, there's vegetation, there's a lot of things that can go wrong or be impacted, when people are just assuming that it's okay because the vehicle can go there, that I'll take it there. And just because you can doesn't necessarily mean you should. So there needs to be some education a lot of education about how people utilize these vehicles. And also, just our own foot traffic is doing that as well. So education on a broader sense, I think, will help address some of these issues.
And looks like there's a follow-up question, or a related question too, about air vibrations, so things like helicopters and air traffic. And I would imagine that we're seeing those types of recreations increase, that potentially they have a similar vibration effect on some of these ancestral sites.
Yeah, there's protocols in place for, of course, I'm not an expert in that area, but how helicopter pilots and those kinds of folks, even drones perhaps, are operating in and around sites. At another site we were working at up in southeastern Utah this summer, it's up a well, it's a known site, but I'm not going to mention it, and it's in a canyon. And one day we had a private helicopter drop in unexpectedly and hover just off the rim, down below the rim, looking at the site. And so that was another vibration kind of thing going on. So yeah, there's a lot of things going on that we're not thinking about in terms of just the side effects of what's going on with visitation.
Someone was interested in some of the things you were talking about with stabilizing ancestral sites. In your interview, you'd mentioned that the use of non-organic materials, that was something that you that was not working well for the sites or for the communities involved. And so she was wondering, what would be a respectful material to stabilize ancestral sites that eventually return to the earth? And so she's asking, about what specific materials are used now and appropriate to stabilize these sites.
If at all possible, you need to, and this is speaking from archaeological perspective first, is that, get a sense of what the original builders were using. In many cases, for the work that we do, we take very small soil samples or mortar samples from areas of the site that we know, or sometimes they're eroded out and we can pick those up off the ground. But you kind of have to know what you're looking for. And we do a scientific test where we put that chunk in a bottle of water and we shake it up real vigorously, and we put it on the shelf and let it settle out. That'll give you a sense of, what kind of size sand particles, clay particles, silt percentages are in there. You can also make test patties. For the work we did all of that. And really, if you're going to be respectful and true to what was used by the original inhabitants, you need to find those, if possible, find those soil sources from the local area. There's a lot of different questions that come into play with that kind of process. So are you permitted to get the soil sample from around the site? We're never taking soil from within the site to use within our mortar that we're using in stabilization work. So we're looking for the best compatible match that we can find from the local area, because of course, that's what the folks back in the day were using to build their homes. And so if you can use that, and sometimes of course clay or soil differs in its consistency. Some is very silty, some have no clay content at all, which is really makes a poor mortar component. So you may have to add some clay. And so that's where kind of getting an understanding of where or what original builders were using. So like the work we did at River House, we had different soil samples from around the site. Ultimately, we deemed that the best match came right from the parking lot that's below the site. And of course, that's what the original builders were probably using. And so it really depends on your site. That's where it's really important to have, a good understanding of what's going on at the site itself, how it was constructed, looking at the original mortar samples to get an idea, and then if possible, finding the best closest match from that area. And if you do have to use, an amender, there's different materials, chemicals out there. We use an acrylic polymer. Sometimes some people might call it Duramax. I don't know if that's the right name, but there's various names, various commercial cement additives that you can add, but we don't add them in the recommended quantities. We dilute it very, very to small amounts. And again, that's something that you probably have to do some test patties to get an understanding of what amount is best. So if you're going to be doing stabilization work, consult with folks who have been doing it. There's a lot of us that have been doing this for a long time and have an understanding of how to address the site. Because you may look at a site and see a part that, oh, I need to fix that, but you need to look at the root cause. What is the root problem of this issue? And maybe if you can fix that issue first, that'll help, remedy some of the impacts that are going on through erosion, visitor traffic, those kinds of things. But in general, yeah, conservation, stabilization work, if you're going to do it respectfully, I think it needs to be utilizing compatible materials that are a very close match to what was originally used, in the past.
Great, thank you. We have another question. A few people are interested in your view on specific projects, it looks like, and then also on land designations in general. So for example, there's one question asking about your opinions on wilderness designation and how that, those types of designations on ancestral lands. And then there's also questions about specific archaeological projects like the Black Mesa archaeological project. So I don't know if you want to talk about specifics or kind of more generally your thoughts on land designation and then different types of, archaeological, projects that are going on in the region.
Oh man, let's see. Let's start local with the Black Mesa stuff. So for those who don't know, Black Mesa is the geologic landform on which the Hopi Mesas are a part of. We're at the very southern end. It's like a hand, right? If you were to look at it from the aerial view, Black Mesa, the higher points are back here, the top of the hand. The Hopi Mesas are the fingers at the southern end, and it tilts. It has a southern facing trend. So the higher ends are north. Black Mesa was known prehistorically, ancestrally, to this day to have large coal deposits below the surface there. And so, of course, that's a resource that was sought after. The energy industry have a long history of that here in the Southwest. We don't necessarily need to go into all of that, but as a part of that compliance work, right, to get the permits to do the extraction of the coal, there was previously large-scale archaeological surveys and excavations done for those areas in which they extracted coal. And so that's in one way, as an archaeologist, I look at that and I know that it helps set some foundation and understanding in terms of the information and technical knowledge that we gained from that work. But from the indigenous perspective, the cultural perspective, it also left a huge impact that we are still dealing with in terms of the impacts to those cultural resources out there, because they were literally removed. They were going to be dynamited, bulldozed, dug up regardless. And so as part of the compliance process here in the United States, there's a regulatory format that they have to go through in order to, I don't want to say get the okay. As archaeologists, we don't give clearances. We let you know what's there. We try and inform you the best mitigation measures to avoid those sites. But oftentimes that avoidance issue, that avoidance option is not taken under consideration. And so they are excavated. The end result is that, there are many thousands of archaeological sites from the Black Mesa area that were excavated, hundreds of thousands of artifacts removed. The story goes, as many places across the Southwest, across the United States, that they were put in boxes, shipped to universities, to museums. Of course, there were hundreds of human remains, perhaps thousands of human remains that were also removed as a part of that work. They are residing somewhere else, and they have not been repatriated, to my knowledge, back to the Hopi tribe, which would have that cultural affiliation to the vast majority of what was taken out of these landscapes. So the Black Mesa project, has that dark legacy associated with it in terms of not just the coal industry and what it's done to our landscape and the natural resources, but the cultural impacts that it has to, a lot of times, we think about cultural resources as something that's only important because it tells us about the past. But for us here at Hopi and other indigenous communities, those are still living places that have a connection to us here in the modern day. So we're still dealing with that. even as recent, as 2016, I was involved in a cultural resource survey up on Black Mesa for the last little tiny fraction of area that the Hopi tribe had under its jurisdiction that was considered allowable to be mined. Fortunately, that never happened, and the coal industry is slowly dying out here on Black Mesa, but we're still dealing with a lot of the repercussions. And it's something that, we're still not done with it. We're actively involved. There's organizations out here in Hopi. The Black Mesa Trust is one led by Vernon Masiasfa, two former Hopi chairmen, Vernon Masiasfa and Ben Navumsa, who are actively involved in this whole issue of getting items repatriated, but also dealing with the large scale reclamation that is needed in the area. So Peabody kind of just upped and walked away and left us to deal with the mess. So there's a lot of things going on with Black Mesa, not just from the archaeological perspective, but, a lot of land-based issues there. What was the other? Wilderness designation. I have a love-hate relationship with wilderness designation as well. And I get some of the understanding behind it, that it's implemented to help preserve areas, kind of sets them off limits from, any kind of development, which is, I think, in the long run, a good thing. But it also, again, you can tie that up with any kind of land or federal land management designation, because what is it, how is it impacting my access as an Indigenous descendant to those areas, right? So, whenever you see a federal land agency making these kinds of land management decisions and boundaries are set up, I always wonder, how is that going to impact, our connections to those areas? And so that's something that always has to be addressed, I think, in terms of how we're in favor or opposed to these types of designations. What are the overall impacts that we can see from them? In general, I think they're positive, they can have positive long-term effects, because we often are quick to rush into our activities, as living in this modern day, and we need to take a step back and really think long and hard about what we are doing to the landscape in this world that we're living on. And in many cases, we have good examples. I just talked about one in Black Mesa about what can happen when destructive industries and activities are allowed to progress into quote unquote pristine areas, and what kind of destruction is left in their wake. And so I think wilderness designations is kind of we're paying homage to the future. I think we're giving future generations their attempt, their try at being land managers, because we know that we're only here for a finite time, and we need to be thinking about, what are we leaving for those future generations to deal with? Are we leaving them a positive legacy, or are we going to leave them with a huge mess because we were, impartial, impatient in our decision making? And so wilderness designations, I think, can grant us that long-term, somewhat long-term opportunity to think about how future generations, I'm sure, hopefully be smarter, more efficient than we are in our thinking. And so we need to be able to give them that their opportunity to take care of the landscape. So it can be good and bad, wilderness designations. But yeah, I always question, just in terms of how does it affect on one level, how do we manage that? So it's a complicated question, I think, but we could have a whole other, there are whole other webinars on that issue out there. So
absolutely. Yeah, there's some great big picture questions coming that people are interested in, that each of these questions could be a webinar. For example, a regional archaeologist says that they struggle to be inclusive with cultural ecological knowledge in empirical data and in information, and creating kind of like holistic education information. And so they're wondering how we can start to break down or kind of, blur the boundaries between, empirical data and inclusive cultural knowledge in the region, in managing and understanding and studying this kind of cultural landscape that we have here.
Oh man, again, another big
Big.
philosophical kind of question there. um, I think
Well, and
inherently they're
I
both.
can, sorry to interrupt, I can narrow it for you. They say that they're interested specifically in education, stabilization, and conservation to try to how you can fit it
Okay,
in there.
I was going to say inherently, I think they're both separate in their foundation sometimes in where they're coming from historically. Western-based science versus indigenous, cultural-based, land-based, true experience kind of knowledge. We've been here for thousands of generations. We have the trial and error already ingrained, I think, in our cultural lifestyles. How we try and meld the two, I guess, or bring them two together. I often, use that metaphor of the round peg in the square hole. It takes some finessing, right, to be able. They're never always fully compatible. There's always going to be some friction and tension, and not meet head to head, so to speak, in a middle ground. When it comes to the conservation and the education, um, again, looking at what it is that you are talking about. What is your specific topic? What is your specific site? What is the specific issue? Looking to get those descendant people involved, whether it's indigenous people or some other community. There's a lot of other communities that have cultural heritage ties to many different things out there on the landscape or within our municipalities. But when it comes to ancestral sites, again, I think it's really imperative that we are seeking to include, not just maybe on a field site visit, like a one-day thing, but you really need to provide opportunities for collaborative work, that's long-term, depending perhaps the duration of your project planning, the actual project work, and then anything else that comes after will help bring those two sets of knowledge together and help smooth out some of the rough areas. Again, it's there's no one size fits all answer for any of this. It's kind of a project by project specific based in terms of the issues that you face within the pre-planning process, the field work, and then whatever you're doing afterwards, because there's different questions that will come about through that process. And so I think just doing your due diligence as an individual, as an organization, as an agency, to seek out that indigenous participation, that voice, and having it sustained, not just a one-time thing, but having it be something that's a continual presence within your project will help address a lot of those questions, that come up. Because again, yeah, it's going to be varied, and I'm just representing. I'm a small percentage of one tribal community. There are, literally hundreds of tribal perspectives out there, thousands of tribal perspectives. And so I know it's not feasible to gather all of those, but, to whatever extent you can, funding, advisory wise, resource wise, time wise, whatever is within your means, I think you can take that kind of outreach and incorporate that kind of perspective in your project, just so that you continually have a voice there.
A kind of similar question. This person is wondering, when visiting, ancestral sites and traveling on ancestral lands, they wanted to know your thoughts on if they should reach out to Indigenous guides, or if non-Native visitors should reach out to Indigenous guides or Native communities when visiting cultural sites, because they have a tension between, they want to learn from Indigenous people, but they also are aware that they don't want to exploit your knowledge or bother you, or just be another non-Native person who's just like, tell me all the stuff, and they're trying to understand how to walk that balance.
I encourage folks in that kind of recreational realm of going out and exploring, experiencing indigenous landscapes, to seek out indigenous owned, operated guiding companies. There's a wide variety of those kinds of organizations and companies, thankfully, that have are online or have recently come online, in the past 5 years. When I started guiding in 2007, that was, unheard of in a way, that there were very few Indigenous guides. That has since fortunately increased in numbers. So we are out there, we are willing, and that's part of those of us who do guides understand what it's about. It's an educational opportunity. It's out there to experience the landscape and get a perspective that you won't get from reading an academic book, or some other archaeologist who may have spent their whole career working in a certain area. Focus was narrow, and it did not look at the Indigenous lifestyle of actually living out on that landscape. And so I would highly encourage folks, to seek out those types of endeavors. Glad I got the sticker. But check out my friend Lewis Williams, Lakota Diné guide that I've with for a lot of years. Ancienttours.com, Ancient Waves Tours. There's folks out there like him, that are taking it, upon themselves to establish a formal company, a formal business in which, those who have questions about how do you do it, well, we're going to provide you some answers in terms of who you can seek out and actively engage in that process, so that you are getting, a perspective that normally may not be available through some other commercial guided company. And I'm not going to bag too much on all the commercial companies, because we're all out there trying to hopefully educate and achieve a goal of respect for the land. But ultimately, go native, go Indigenous if you can. That's our ancestral land out there. Our roots and connections go way back, and so we're able to tell you, I think, a little bit more about some of the things that have happened there. But I highly encourage that. So yeah, go seek them out.
Awesome. We're coming up to our half an hour, so I want to be respectful of your time. Looks like you have a friend in the chance wants to say hello. Said Louise is his brother-in-law, so he's psyched to hear you representing. Someone else is quickly wondering if there are archaeological organizations you would recommend donating to.
I work closely with Archaeology Southwest. That's one. They're a Tucson-based organization. I've had a long relationship with them. Another is Crow Canyon Archaeological Center in Cortez, Colorado. I just came off a trip with them yesterday. Those are two, archaeologically based nonprofit organizations that I feel comfortable with. I have, again, both the Hopi tribe and myself have continued relationships with them because of the respect and the collaborative work that they do. Those are the two that I choose to remain with, as I move forward in my work. So there's a lot more. So, if there's a place or a chance to put references up or something like that, I'll do so. But yeah, those two come to mind. I highly recommend them.
Awesome. And then somebody's wondering how they can connect with you and what, if how do you feel about people reaching out? And if you're okay with it, where can they find you?
I do have a website, a blog. I post some writings there every once in a great while. I'm kind of difficult to get things finished sometimes, but it's From the Earth Studio, fte-studio.com. I should have had a sticker, but
I just threw it
anyway,
in
yeah, that's okay. Yeah, you can find my email there. You can leave a comment. You can check out, the writing that I do, just whatever, and that way it's a easily controlled way, I guess, for me to remain in contact with people, because it's something that I'm active on, and I'll be posting some more writing coming up here, hopefully in the next coming weeks, about the work we did this summer. And the Indigenous guide thing is another project I'm working on with some of my friends. And so we're going to be putting up some information, interviews, and some other stuff that hopefully people will find useful. So that's the best way to track me down.
Great. And I'll just shout out too, you were involved in a book project too that just recently launched, Becoming Hopi. Is that correct?
Yeah. I'm using the book actually as a as a base for my phone right here. But it's called Becoming Hopi. It's a big collaborative project. I had a very small role in it, and I'm fortunate to be able to be included in it. It came out in May or June of this year. It's available through University of Arizona Press, so you can go to their website, and it's probably right on their front page, or it should be, But it's a large volume. It's about 700 pages. A good portion of that is maps of different things, a lot of good graphics. But when you are trying to um, talk about and put into writing a cultural history of Hopi people, I guarantee you it's not going to be small. It has to be a large endeavor, a big project, because there's a lot of information and a lot of history that has happened from time immemorial to the present day, right? And so I think 700 pages is the best the editors can do, to get it condensed down and make it readable. It's meant to be accessible. It's a result of internal critiques from within our own culture preservation office about work needing to be accessible for the Hopi community, for Indigenous people, not a scholarly thing. There's a lot of scholarly work and research involved in it, but it's not presented in that manner because we want to make it accessible and understandable to our own communities, because that's who needs to benefit from this work first and foremost. And so it's a big collaborative effort by our Hopi Culture Preservation Office. They play a huge role, not only in the work that I do. I've had a lot of support from them, but just in being advocates for Indigenous people. So you're reading the book, goes a long way in showing support for that office, because they're a small group. They need all the help they can get, and so go check it out. It's Becoming Hopi.
Looks like one of our panelists has said they are already working their way through it. So, and they recommend it as well. Lyle, thank you so much for taking this time and for this and the interview, and for sharing everything with us. And everything will be available for links for people, and we encourage everybody to share this and share the interview, so that all the great things that Lyle has to say can reach a wider audience. And so thank you so much, Lyle. Thank you for everyone who attended. And yeah, really appreciate your time.
Thank you all. I appreciate it. Have a good day.
Take care.